Turn it on. Sorry. Do we have to do the pledge again? No. So we're going to begin with public comment, and I'm going to lay out some ground rules that we're going to really need to stick to tonight because we have a very full agenda that we have a lot to cover. So I just appreciate if folks would accommodate us and listen to the rules before we start this. So, we will only take public comment at two designated periods, one at the beginning, immediately following this, and one at the end of the meeting, 2 periods. You may want to reserve your comment until after you have heard the board discuss the topic that interests you, as new information might be revealed. So just give that some thought. You will be given 5 minutes to speak as per board policy. You will be timed, and you must yield the podium when that 5 minutes is up. The board and administration will carefully consider each and every public comment, but we will not respond or engage in discussion unless glaring factual errors are made. Interruptions during discussion or presentations will be directed to that final comment period. Those making comments or any others with any concerns can follow up with email summaries to the board or the administration. I'm going to ask that we group comments by subject matter because we've got a couple of different areas that people might want to talk about tonight. First, we're going to ask those folks who want to talk about facilities usage policy that we're going to work on tonight to come forward. Then we're going to ask the folks who want to talk about standard-based reporting to come forward. And then anybody else who wants to make a comment about anything else can come forward. When we begin, I'm going to ask that those who wish to speak approach the podium one at a time, use the microphone, and state your name and address for the record. And now, if anybody would like to speak regarding our facilities usage policy, please come forward and address the board.
I'm Frank Swanton, 363 Vincent Court. I know you've got a full agenda tonight, so I'll try and be brief. I would like to ask you to pass the first reading on the community use of school facilities, Draft 1, from the Policy Committee agenda, item number 9C5. This policy addresses the concerns as expressed by residents and neighbors at the last board meeting, as well as comments received at the committee meeting. It is straightforward, easy to read, and should be easy to implement. I was also asked you to add one more sentence to the last paragraph of the revision, and that would read, the superintendent or designee will notify immediate neighbors of the request and the board meeting that the request will be discussed. After discussing this with Dr. Sophie yesterday, our thought was that a hand-delivered notification would probably be the best kind of notification for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to talk about that facilities usage policy? All right, so if anybody would like to address the board regarding standards-based reporting, please feel free to do so, but we are going to discuss it, and so some of what you're going to say may be preempted, but feel free. If you could state your name and address for the board, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks. Allison Hartline, 727 Ravine Avenue. So I have a senior and a sophomore at Lake Forest High School and a 7th grader at middle school. In my life before kids, I was an elementary school teacher for Chicago Public Schools and for Denver Public Schools. This petition was started because many of us parents shared concerns about standard-based grading at our middle school. These concerns were voiced in different ways at different times and from different people to maybe a teacher or an administrator or the school board without much of a response. At this point, a petition seemed the best way to really be heard and to make it clear that many of us are not on board with SBG. It was appreciated that our schools are trying to find ways to be innovative. That is not lost on us. However, the bottom line is that unless Lake Forest High School adopts standard-based grading, Lake Bluff Middle School is not preparing them properly for the traditional grading system at the high school. The Lake Forest High School Board President confirmed to me that the high school has no plans in the near future to adopt standard-based grading. So for the record, I will read the petition out loud, and we had a total of 126 signatures. As parents and community members of Lake Bluff District 65, we are requesting that the district administration reinstate a traditional grading system at Lake Bluff Middle School. Traditional grading system is defined as using letter grades and number percentages. We would like the grading system to be aligned with Lake Forest High School to better prepare our middle school students for the high school transition. So, and I have copies of the petition if that is something I should pass around. Yes? Okay.
Yep.
I have 3 copies, so. All right, thank you. Eva Rice. Oh, Kay
Okay.
Clifford, a student will speak.
Please, just state your name and address, okay?
I'm Kay Clifford and 320 Circle Drive. I am currently a freshman at Lake Forest High School, and I started middle school at Lake Bluff with letter grades. However, during my 7th grade year, they started to incorporate standard-based grading. Standards were introduced to students as a way to focus more on their learning rather than the grade they receive. When I first heard the idea, I thought it was great because I thought it would be a good way to take away some of the stress that students face when receiving letter grades. However, it started to create some bad habits and not reduce as much stress from students, but it especially did not prepare us for high school. With standards, they didn't always accurately reflect on how I was doing as a student. Many students, along with myself, created bad habits of not having to put in as much effort on their tests and schoolwork, but still got away with good grades. Standards also did not prepare students for the high school. For example, even when you got multiple questions wrong on a test or made multiple errors, with standards, you can still get the highest grade of a 4. You can also retake a standard you didn't do well on. At the high school, a majority of teachers don't allow you to retake any tests. These are just 2 of the reasons that standard-based grading does not prepare for high school. I hope the school board considers bringing back letter grading for a better opportunity for students to be successful in middle school and high school. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Eva Rice, 401 East Scranton is my address. I have 3 children, a 4th grader at LBES, a 7th grader at LBMS, and a freshman at Lake Forest High School. I've been volunteering for the PTO for 8 years, and I'm very involved in my children's schools and their education, which is why I'm speaking on behalf of some parents today. I don't believe SBR is preparing our children to succeed at the high school. The first comment I heard at freshman orientation was how important their GPA would be from the moment they started. Do our 8th graders know what a GPA is? They don't receive grades, only numbers that are confusing and subjective. I agree with conceptual learning and think it's important to understand and retain the information, but why can't they be taught with letter grades? The administration brought this to our school 3 years ago, but it was never clear to parents why we were trying something so new that doesn't align with our high school or other school districts in our community. I know it hasn't been easy for the administration to roll this out, and they've spent lots of time and money implementing this grading system, but many parents in our school district are still not in agreement with standards-based reporting. I wanted to just read a few comments from the survey that was given out to incoming 7th and 8th grade parents asking if they understood standards-based reporting. I feel like, and this is one parent, I feel like you didn't ask the most important question. Which grading standard do you believe will best prepare our students for the high school? I'm deeply concerned that our students will not be prepared for the rigor of LFHS, deadlines, and grading techniques when they arrive. Please look to Northbrook Junior High, which just recently returned to percentage and grades after trying SBR for several years. The reason for the return was based mainly on the fact that the junior high and high school grading systems were not aligned. As a parent with 2 high school students, I can attest that our middle school struggles with teaching executive functioning skills, and SBR, with its soft deadlines and retesting, does not help that situation at all. Another comment, I don't believe it provides a clear picture of where a student should be at a given point in time, making it difficult for a student or parent to know if the student needs to put in more work, or is it just at a 1 or 2 because it's early in the semester? I look at the numbers throughout the semester and have no idea how to normalize them to know if the numbers are good, bad, or just right considering where they are in the curriculum. Another parent says, standard-based reporting doesn't give us the information we need. It gives us more detail than we need about content and standards. We would rather have teachers send comments than spend time on standards-based reporting. It would be better if tests and assignments were sent home for signatures so we could see what they're doing in real time. And then another one says, I don't think the current grading system motivates kids or parents to help their kids to monitor or excel in the classroom. I would rather kids make mistakes in middle school and learn how to best manage their time and schoolwork before they get to the high school where it does really matter. And another comment, we were upset to receive our child's last report card after the school year ended, specifically because his science grades were significantly below what we had heard at his prior conference. In my opinion, students earning 2s at the end of the year should require parental contact by the teacher. So those are just a few of the comments that were shared in the survey, and I don't know if you guys have seen them, but it's nice to hear that other parents are feeling the same way. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Annie Chance, 8 West Stone Avenue, Lake Forest, but I'm a teacher at Lake Bluff Middle School. I teach 7th and 8th grade math. In the summer of 2014, after completing 3 years of teaching math after returning to LBMS, I was frustrated with the way information was being reported to my students and to their parents about the progress they've been having in my class. I was frustrated with students associating themselves with being an A or a B or a C student. I was frustrated with students looking at a test score, sometimes an 85%, which I would think is okay, immediately throwing it away in the garbage can without even looking at the feedback I'd given them because they were disappointed or they knew how disappointed their parents would be with that score. I was frustrated with students thinking they weren't good at math and would never be good at math. I was frustrated with our grading system giving a false impression of how a student was doing as students and parents saw an A and immediately thought there's nothing to be concerned about. But if you dug deeper, you'd see that the student got a C on every test, but because they completed every homework assignment, their grade was bumped up to a 90%, which got them that A. Another student in the class got an A on every test, but never could complete the homework assignments because they had to take care of their siblings at home. They could never earn that A. In my opinion, the system was flawed, and I spent that summer looking for solutions. My extensive search that summer for a more accurate and honest grading system led me to something called standards-based grading. After spending my summer researching how I could implement these ideas into my classroom, I spoke to 2 coworkers, and they joined me in a small effort to implement some standards-based practices into our math classrooms. We began that year simply by writing the standards on our assessments and giving our students an E, M, or G for each standard, along with an overall score. It was a shift in thinking for the students, but what I witnessed that year was a change in students' views about their own ability. Students looked over assessments for areas where they excelled, and we celebrated them. They also looked over areas where they struggled, and we worked to relearn that material. They looked over students thinking about their math abilities shifted to a mindset where they could find success and be proud of their work. I continued to implement more of these practices over the next few years and saw positive changes in my students as I began to remove total points and percentages from my classroom. Students were no longer concerned as much with how many points they needed to get to that next letter grade, but focused more on what they could do to better understand the concepts I was teaching them. At the same time, a committee at our school was formed from teachers interested in learning more about working to create report cards that match the standards and making our grades more informative and reflective of student achievement in our courses. The original 4 of us that formed that committee had a combination of approximately 60 years of experience in the classroom, including high school experience, and each held a master's degree in education. We spent countless hours over the next few years working with experts in the field, with each other, and with our administration to work to develop a better system that provided accurate and descriptive feedback for our students in order to promote their growth. This was the grassroots effort that started with teachers, looking for a better way to support middle school students. Our administration supported us, encouraged us, questioned us, but this change was led by the teachers. Our standards-based grading system is currently in its full first year of implementation for all grades. While I can't stand here and say it's perfect, I don't know if any grading system is. I can stand before you and say that what we're reporting now is a much more accurate and honest picture of how students are doing in our classes. The staff at our school care deeply about each of the students in the classes and want only what's best for them now and in the future. Lake Bluff is a wonderful community that I've been blessed to call my work home for a long time. I appreciate the involvement among parents in this community to want what's best for their children. I appreciate the support we receive from members in the community who trust us to do what's best.
Minute left, sorry.
Oh, okay. I'll repeat the sentence. I appreciate the support we receive from members in the community who trust us to do what's best for the students we serve and to those who reach out to us when things are unclear. Most of all, I appreciate the staff at my school who work day in and day out to teach, to care for, and support the students they work with each day and to continually strive to improve their practices in the best interest of their students.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to talk about it? Not seeing anybody. Finally, if there's anybody who would like to address the board on any other topic, please do so. If not, we're going to move on and move to an item of school recognition. In this case, our business department and our business officer has received a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting, and I'm going to let Dr. Sophie address that.
We received a letter from the Government Finance Officers Association notifying us that our comprehensive annual financial report, better known as CAFR, for the fiscal year ending 2018 qualifies for the GFOA's, Government Finance Officers Association's Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in governmental accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by a government and management. Jay, this is what year for this? This is the second year. In the world of school finance, it's very rigorous, and it truly is a huge accomplishment and a lot of work for the district. And so we wanted to recognize Jay Kahn, our Director of Finance and Operations.
So this is like a rock star award in the
This
finance
is-
world?
And it really certifies that our district operations are at the highest level.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. Thanks, Jay. Great job. I realized I skipped an item, so just circle back, this is quick. Item 5 on our agenda is the addition of a discussion item. So if the board would like to offer up a item to be on a future agenda, now is the time to do so, or if there's something you need to discuss briefly with the board now is your chance as well. You can always email myself or Jean to get future agenda items in the queue. So, not seeing any, I'm going to move on with reports. And unless things have changed, I'm the only report, right? Okay, so for the president's report, I'm going to once again update everybody on the superintendent search. Hopefully, everybody by now knows that Dr. Sophie is retiring at the end of this academic year, and we are well underway in our search for our superintendent. And I'm going to do a quick look back at what we've done and then tell you what we've got coming up. So in September, we initiated a community survey. We had 150-plus respondents. In September, we also had focus groups with 10 different stakeholder groups. On October 8th, we had a presentation from our search firm that summarized all that data collected, both focus groups and surveys, and they used that to create a superintendent profile to tell the board what the community is looking for in a new superintendent. Tonight, before we came upstairs, we were in a closed session meeting with our lawyer to review some fundamentals of contracts when you hire a new superintendent. So she was going over with us a template and some of the things we should be looking for and questions we should be asking. Ongoing, our search firm is doing active recruiting for if they find candidates out there who seem like they meet our profile, helping them to be influenced to apply here. We have accepted applications from potential supers through October, and our search firm is also in the process of doing ongoing pre-screening or screening of candidates who They do that to whittle it down to a slate that they're going to present to the board at the next board meeting, where they present something like 5 or 7 possible candidates, and the board decides who we will interview or not. Just as an update, this hasn't changed, if anybody else has heard this before, hasn't changed much, but to date, we've had 40 applicants for the job of superintendent, 15 of which are sitting superintendents, 4 superintendents, 1 deputy superintendent, 3 executive directors, 4 directors, 3 principals, 1 very confident student, 3 former superintendents. The student is a master's degree student, but even so, it's pretty confident. 3 former superintendents, 1 district administrator, 2 consultants, 1 associate superintendent, 1 assistant principal, 2 chief educational officers, and 1 private school administrator. So it's quite a lot of applicants. Our search firm, at our next closed session on the 5th of November, will boil that down to a handful of potential interviewees, and then the board will decide who we're going to interview, and that happens at the 15th and 16th of November? Yeah. So looking forward, at our November 5th, and this is important for board members as well, our November 5th closed session, it's a closed session only. John, make note, dinner is at 5:30.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. We'll start at 6.
I have 4:45 for dinner.
If you'd like, you can come a little early. The slate of candidates will be introduced by the search firm. The board will also be discussing the categories of interview questions they would like to take ownership for, and we'll do a little bit of discussion about the types of questions we need to be asking these candidates. At our November 12th closed session, that's part of a regular meeting. There will be no meal, sorry, John. We will review the interview questions that each board member is going to come prepared with. And we'll also be, with our search firm, talking about a rating and evaluating procedure that we might want to employ when we interview candidates to keep track of who we like and how we like them. At our November 15th meeting, that begins the first round of interviews. There will be dinner served at 5:30, John. We'll do 3 interviews the night of, that's a Friday night, by the way. Your board that works for free is working on a Friday night, interviewing candidates, 3 people. And then Saturday morning, beginning at 8:30 with breakfast. Another 3 candidates will be interviewed beginning at 9 o'clock. We will then stick around a little bit after that to try, if possible, to come up with a list of finalists who will then be interviewed, I didn't write that down, December 3, 4, 5, 2, 3?
Well, it's 3, 4, and if you have 3 candidates, it will include
3,
December
4,
2nd.
Right, so that's kind of where we stand on the superintendent search. A lot's going on, and it's going to be moving really quickly from here on in. And I think that's it for all the reports. Anybody have any questions about what I just said about the timeline? All right, so we're going to move on to discussions. And the very first item is we've cleared some room for a policy discussion, particularly about the community use of school facilities policy. And before we begin that discussion as a board, I want to say something for the record. When it comes to community use of schools and policy 8:20, I want it noted that since our last board discussion, which I think was 2 meetings ago, Superintendent Jean Sophie has reached out directly to all those individuals that initially contacted us by email regarding the wedding at LBMS that triggered all of this. She offered all the opportunity to meet individually so their concerns could be heard and discussed at length. And so comments from those meetings, along with those collected at our last board meeting, have been carefully considered when crafting the revised policy on facility usage. So with that being said, everybody has received, both by email during the week and in the most current version of the board packet, and some of us have it at our seat,
Yeah, I put it by
the
everybody.
most current versions of
Right.
the policy committee's draft, as well as a recommendation from one of the policy committee members.
You want me to take over from there?
Sure.
So, we did have a policy committee meeting where we discussed this and the other policies that are up for first read this evening. And what we have in front of us was based upon discussion and Shelley and my notes from the policy meeting. I want to highlight a couple things in this first one. You should be looking at draft 1 from policy meeting. That's what should be at top. It's important to note that our community use of school facilities and green space or lots, they're available to governmental agencies and community organizations that benefit children or the community at large only during non-school hours. Talks about some conditions for that. Obviously, the use of school facilities for school purposes has always taken precedence over any other uses. The second paragraph on student groups and fees, every year the board approves facility use fees. We do that usually with school fees in March and April. In the third paragraph, I want to highlight something very important that based upon feedback, use of alcohol, vaping, smoking, and use of marijuana products, because marijuana comes in different forms, is prohibited at all times on district property. This would also, though, include 4th of July, Pumpkin Fest, anything that's on our property, there would be no use of any of these things allowed. The final paragraph, I think, really summarizes a couple of the big things for the neighbors. Use of the district's facilities and lots will not be approved for any private events. All outdoor events must be over and picked up by dusk on any given day. If it's a school-type item, we don't have lights back there anyway, so if they were playing a soccer game or a field hockey, it would have to be over by dusk anyway. Any request for community use of school property that falls outside of this policy has to have board approval. Now, it's important for you as a board to note that there would not be any fast tracking on that, because for board approval, number one, we'd have to look at the board calendar and find the next approval meeting, which, as you know, is only once a month. So we would have to find that. Usually it would range anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks, depending on when the date falls. In the summertime, we only have that really short July meeting, so it could legitimately be up to 8 to 10 weeks. So it's important to note that there would be no fast track on that. And then finally, I put on here, any use of district green space, as we discussed at policy, is expected to follow the noise ordinance established in Lake Bluff. The only thing that, because I know Pony mentioned it tonight, and we talked about in policy, which policy members may want to discuss a little bit further as well, is there is no comment in here on notification of neighbors, because we had talked about that being possibly in the procedures. And I just wanted to share that I would look at this as I talked to Pony, it's exactly like what Mark and I did when we did the renovations for school. We did a flyer, we stuffed them in the mailboxes, just literally around the immediate area, and that is already put in procedures. So, but the question's going to be with you as a board if you want that in the policy or not. So I'm going to turn it over. The second page that says possible revisions from a policy member is a lot more concise. Because of time, I don't think that a couple of the topics were mentioned in here. So, but there are revisions in here that you may want to consider. So I'm going to turn it over. Our three policy members are Julie, Leanne, and Ann. Welcome to policy, by the way.
Thank you.
So, any of you want to add any comments?
Sure. So I am the policy member that submitted the alternate, not knowing that it was going to be published because it wasn't quite complete for my edification. I sent it around to show directionally where I think we should be going. The issue that I have with the initial policy that was circulated is not so much substantive as it is just clarity. I think that it leaves open some questions as to how the policy is going to be administered and to work, and so I don't think that we ought to approve this draft number 1. In terms of the substantive differences or what is left unaddressed in my proposed policy, I know that there is, in the first policy, an absolute ban on the use for private events, the stipulation that things be picked up by dusk, the noise ordinance, and then the request that neighbors must be notified. I'm okay with some of those. What I would say we should do is just table this until we can get a completed revised draft to circulate at the next board meeting when these issues are considered. But I don't think draft number 1, I don't think it reads well. You can look at the first sentence and I think not quite understand who's allowed to use the property and who is not. So I think we can do better than that.
I agree.
Yeah, I thought some of your rewording was good. A couple of other things I noticed. One is that when we talked in policy meeting, I asked that we broaden the wording that eliminated alcohol, vaping, smoking, because you don't want to omit something that shouldn't be used, and then people say, well, you didn't say you couldn't use other drugs.
Illegal narcotics.
Yeah, so we need to broaden that language somehow, and I'm sure we can pull from some other policy to do that. Another thing is that our facilities probably need to be available if there's a disaster, and I was saying that we should probably have a line in there about that, which, isn't really private use, but still should be considered. I really thought the notification should be in procedure, because your procedure would be, I can't even imagine, we're saying we're not going to do these private events anyway, and it would have to come to the board. I don't think it'll ever happen. If it did, I just think that that needs to be a procedure that you guys would follow. I don't know how many people you'd notify or what radius from the school you'd go to, but that seems procedural to me.
Yeah, I agree.
I had a couple thoughts. I agree that the possible revisions from the mystery policy committee member is a much more, it's much easier to read. It's not nearly as all over the place. And so I had a couple of thoughts. I would love to see that as the starting place, but with most of these other things worked back in. The comment about private events being excluded, outdoor events concluded by dusk and cleaned up by dusk if possible. I don't know that you could ever command that.
I think we can, and because the problem that came up was people
But then they come back, maybe they
stuff
come back the
in
next
middle of
day and finish up or something, because they don't want the noise in the middle of the night, you know what I mean?
So maybe reword it to say that
yeah.
if there was some other work, it would have to happen during daylight or something. All right.
Then the other thing I was thinking was, we should also include the adherence to the Village of Lake Bluff noise ordinances as a requirement.
Yeah.
And then just a couple little nits in the very first paragraph, the very last sentence in the first paragraph, the district reserves the right to cancel previously. That sentence is also down in the very last paragraph, so I don't think you need to have it twice. And then the use in the 1-2-3rd paragraph, the use of school facilities, including green spaces. Do we want to also say and parking lots, or just the use of any and all school facilities, perhaps?
Again, this was not a complete product, so we can go through some of that. I do want to talk, though, about the big conceptual issue of private events being completely banned. It seems to me that we want to leave ourselves some latitude to maybe consider that. It will have to be board approved. It will have to be subject to all of the additional requirements that we've now set forth. But again, I don't know. This hasn't been a big problem historically, that we want to close the door on all of that going forward, subject to what the board has learned from this experience and the revised policy. So I would open that up for discussion.
I have a question about who's going to police these things? I mean, who's going to go over there and say, hey, you can't smoke pot today, or you got to clean up by dusk? I mean, is it the police force? Is it Gene? Is it Mark? I mean,
No.
yeah, so I mean, how are you going to control this?
Well, how do we control it anyway? It's the rule. Hopefully people follow the rule, and,
It's the law anyway, in order for any,
So you call the cops?
in order for any product to be used on any state and any school property, it needs to be approved by the board. That's Illinois state law. But there are procedures the police department has for we work with them all the time for events like this. So, but it's during the non-events that are the bigger issues, actually. The events are easier to police, the non-events are harder to
But
police.
somebody has to do the policing. I mean,
Well, some of this has to be done prior to when they're planning it. I mean, somebody's got to understand what's allowed, what's not allowed. And so there's a little self-policing that people have to do.
good luck with that.
I'm going to go back to Julie's comment, because the way I read it, so I think I'm reading it the right way. The way I'm reading it, first of all, I think what you're saying is allow an opening for private events? Is that what you're saying on yours? So then we would have to rework the sentence that says, anything that falls outside this policy. So if we have something that says anything outside this policy, that would cover your concern, right?
Right.
Because it would have to go for board approval.
Right.
In the procedures, I've already put in my notes, and they will go in procedures that neighbors would need to be notified. That's a procedural thing. But I think from you guys, I need to know what you want to do next. I would love it if one of you takes it, reworks it a little bit. I did circle everything that needs to be in there, though.
Yeah.
I think that when we talked in our policy meeting, we were saying that really, no, private events just aren't allowed. And someone sure could have some exception that they would want to bring to the board, but basically it's not allowed. And I kind of feel like we should start from there.
Yeah, I agree. I can't think of I'm having a hard time coming up with a private event that would be reasonable there, that wouldn't involve the school or a nonprofit or some,
Intergovernmental.
Or
because we
intergovernmental, right.
Go.
So in terms of private, I'm thinking weddings, I'm thinking family events. I can't think of a reason why we would want to allow that.
And if it's
So I
not
like
included,
starting there.
they come
right.
before the board and make their case, I
Right,
suppose.
and then we can
But
revise.
that
yeah.
language, if we, instead of just, if we replace the sentence of no private event allowed with anything that falls outside of this policy or that's stated in this policy, leaves the door open in case there is some weird thing that comes up that we would want to let be held there, but also doesn't let anything slip by. We'd still have to approve it as a board, and we're not going to approve something like a wedding,
Is the door open already, though, without saying that? Isn't the door open technically if somebody wanted to approach us anyway? Just have a more strict policy, but the door is still technically open, so we could revise the policy.
Anything
and
would go
allow-
back to the board.
Right.
But I think you as a board need to, the way it's written right now, somebody could bring it forward to you. And I'm going to go back to another one of Julie's comments. In the case of an emergency, Red Cross could always come in and use our buildings. I mean, we're talking disaster, though, catastrophic.
But that's not a private event.
So, no, I'm getting
No, I
back
just
to
thought we
another
should
comment.
designate,
I think that's a good-
disaster.
I don't know if you want that in the policy or not, because that just kind of goes without saying. In a disaster, all the buildings are used. That's what happens. So you
I
have to
think put
tell
it
me
in
if
there.
it goes in there, though.
I think put it in there unless somebody has an objection, because when that happens, somebody's going to say, well, can we do that? And they're going to flip through a policy, and if they don't already know the answer, I think it should say it.
Okay.
We would
But
do
I don't
that.
think it's hard to imagine a situation where a private event might be reasonable, though. I mean, you've got
Have we had one?
a
I mean, we haven't had
5K
one ever, right?
fundraiser for the, Red Cross.
So what can we say?
But that's a nonprofit. Wouldn't that be covered under what we've already put in here in terms of nonprofit or child/family oriented organization? I'm thinking private event is more like,
Community yeah.
right, I'm thinking private event is more like
Yeah.
wedding, more
But
like,
but if we start to try to define private event, that'll lead into
Right.
a whole bunch of
True,
problems
yeah.
as well.
I mean, community organizations that benefit children, so if you had like a 5K
Yeah.
to support
right, I think
juvenile
it's covered.
diabetes
Yeah.
research, or
Could we say something like generally private
Boy
events will
Scouts
not be
wanting to-
allowed? What about something like generally private events will not be allowed, but exceptions will be considered if brought to the board in advance?
Yeah, I think something like that.
But it's already there as long as they have to come to the board anyway
Yeah.
for approval. So you already have a stopgap.
All right, so just a kind of a point of clarification on procedure. Later on, we're going to have a approval of the first read.
Right, I think we remove it.
So we table that approval?
That's what I'm
And then come
hearing.
back with
Because we're
another
changing it,
version?
yeah.
Okay. All right, so any other comments on that particular policy?
I just need to know who to work with on this, so we can get this going, so we can get it approved for first read at the next meeting. Julie?
Yeah, right.
Julie?
Mystery policy
think
writer.
I'm-
All right, so,
But then I need to
anyway.
get it so that I can circulate it to Leanne and Ann, so that it's from the policy committee. All right, that's my end.
okay, and so now we're going to move on to discussion item 8B, which is standards-based reporting, and I believe Principal Nathan Blackmer is going to speak. And I just want to say, from my standpoint personally, I truly appreciate the hours and hours and hours that has been put into this process by our administrators and teachers, and the amount of thoughtful and careful and scientific consideration that has been done on this whole subject matter. So I just want to show that appreciation for you guys.
Thank you, appreciate that. Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide this update on standards-based practices at Lake Bluff Middle School. I'd like to start by acknowledging the amazing work that our teachers have been engaged in since 2016. We're lucky to have such dedicated professional educators who consistently strive to provide the best possible instruction to our students. The implementation of standards-based practices is just one example of their dedication to excellence. To understand why schools are shifting their practices away from traditional grading, we must clarify the purpose for grading in the first place. Is the grade to inform students about their performance or their parents? Is it to incentivize students to do schoolwork or to document their behavior? Is it to sort students into groups in school based on skill level? Answering that question is precisely where the work began in 2016. This was a district-wide effort, not just a Lake Bluff Middle School initiative. After engaging in intensive professional development and training on the best practices that support teaching and learning, we moved ahead with defining the purpose of grading in Lake Bluff District 65. That purpose is to provide accurate feedback and reflect student growth. In order to meet that goal, we need to communicate what current levels of performance are as students work toward specific learning targets. Growth toward meeting those learning targets, also known as standards, are part of what all schools in the state of Illinois are held accountable for. Students are assessed on standards, and ultimately, schools are identified in one of four distinctions: exemplary, commendable, underperforming, lowest performing, based on a combination of achievement and growth. You may recall Dr. Rubenstein's presentation on that process, and I know there's more information to come. Beyond the purpose of grading, perhaps it would be helpful to touch upon some of the ways standards-based reporting has improved teaching. Fundamentally, teachers, not just in Lake Bluff, but across the country, have grappled with the knowledge that traditional grades, based on percentages, are frequently unreliable, arbitrary, subjective, and vary in terms of what they actually measure. The practice of producing one cumulative course grade by averaging a student's performance on a wide variety of measures, including assessments, homework, classwork, preparation, behavior, effort, work quality, are problematic and widely accepted by experts as not best practice. Furthermore, traditional grading is often perceived by students and parents as a reward or consequence for learning or not learning the material. The implementation of standards-based practices has served to inform instruction in a more individualized way. Instead of talking with students about how they can accumulate more points to raise their overall grade, we talk about the specific skills that they haven't learned yet. We focus on progress and learning from mistakes. We foster a growth mindset and the idea that teachers will teach until the students learn the material. We're also able to clearly articulate what students have learned and celebrate those accomplishments. In addition, teachers are utilizing better assessments to inform instruction and make adjustments based on the needs of their students. I'll acknowledge that the shift to standards-based reporting is a big change for some parents. I know that despite our best efforts to communicate and educate parents about standards-based reporting, there are still some who either don't understand it or don't agree with it. The Standards-Based Reporting Committee has reviewed the results of the parent survey that was administered in June. Those results were summarized and shared with the board in September. We're also aware and have reviewed the online petition that has been circulating. With regard to that petition, I'm going to resist the urge to respond to comments posted on that petition this evening, as I do not believe this is the best format for that sort of dialogue. I would like to reiterate, however, that we will continue to be open to talking with parents about their concerns or questions related to standards-based reporting. To date, we've had surprisingly few parents who've taken the opportunity to speak with me or the teachers. This is my first time in 12 years as principal that a petition has been distributed and used to voice parent concern. I know that for our teachers who have worked so hard and believe so strongly in this work, this negative feedback has been difficult to digest. At the same time, it's important that we take parent feedback into consideration, no matter what form it comes in. Therefore, I'm recommending a hybrid of standards-based feedback and letter grades beginning in the fall of 2020. With that in mind, I'd like to outline our plans moving forward. The Standards-Based Reporting Committee will be working throughout the remainder of this school year to make adjustments to our current processes. The goal is to adopt a reporting system that provides parents with a letter grade that summarizes overall achievement, in addition to providing information about progress towards meeting the standards. To be clear, I'm not recommending the abandonment of standards-based practices, but rather a modification to the way that information is communicated with parents. Implementing this sort of change requires careful planning, teacher training, and technical adjustments to the systems that we use to store and process student achievement data. With the guidance and commitment of our Standards-Based Reporting Committee, I am confident that we can make changes that students, teachers, and parents find beneficial. On behalf of the teaching staff at Lake Bluff Middle School, I'm kindly requesting your support, patience, and ongoing dialogue as we continue to make improvements to our reporting practices. Thank you very much.
Any questions or comments from the board for Mr. Blackburn? Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to move on. Discussion item 8C, IASB Delegate Assembly discussion. The IASB.
Wait, I do have a question, though, generally, actually, for the board. Where does this issue fall on the dance floor balcony? What's the board's role in terms of approving this or not approving it or giving direction on how the administration ought to move forward with the grading system? Is that a place where we belong or we don't belong?
No.
Okay.
It's an administrative decision, and it's an administrative decision that Nate made with his staff. Obviously, if board members were concerned about that, they'd work with me or the future superintendent on that if they were hearing a lot of, I'm going to use the word constituent feedback on that. But that's a decision that Nate and his staff have made on their own based upon feedback and the petition that was circulated.
Okay.
So.
I think it's important for everyone in the room to understand, how this all works and to whom appeals should be made and what authority we do or don't have to, guide the administration in this respect. And I thank all of you on both sides of it for coming forward and sharing your thoughts and concerns. Obviously, everyone has given this a lot of deep consideration. I think all of the comments and the way in which they were delivered were responsible and well taken. So thank you for that.
I'm going to move on. Discussion item 8C, the IASB Delegate Assembly discussion. For those not familiar, IASB is the Illinois Association of School Boards. We have an annual meeting. I wrote a little statement to explain some of this. So the Delegate Assembly is held every year at the Joint Annual Conference in November in Chicago. And that is the meeting where school board members vote on proposed resolutions submitted by local school boards. Each school board that is a member of the association is entitled to one voting delegate at the assembly. Every member board is advised to select one individual board member to serve as its delegate and to review proposed resolutions with the full board before determining its vote. The delegate assembly vote determines the final decision on all resolutions. If approved by the delegate assembly, resolutions become position statements or belief statements in the IASB Constitution, and thus giving IASB staff direction on legislative positions. In other words, adopted resolutions provide direction to lobbying efforts by the IASB on behalf of Illinois Public Schools. So the proposed resolution at the Delegate Assembly that we have been asked to discuss in advance of that assembly is resolution number 1, on school safety, as submitted by the Mercer County School District 404. Just FYI, Mercer County is an extremely rural district, well south and west of us, down between Galesburg and Moline. It's very rural, and it's huge. District 404 is asking for IASB support and advocacy for legislation which provides local school boards the option of developing student safety and protection plans which allow voluntary district employees in any capacity the ability to carry a concealed firearm on district property, provided that employees has a valid Illinois FOID card, holds a certified Illinois concealed carry license, has completed all additional trainings and certifications set forth by the respective school board, one of which must include yearly certified active shooter training. In addition to student safety, the District 404's rationale for this proposal essentially is that of response time, expense, and available manpower. They are so large that law enforcement response time is so delayed as they consider to be ineffective. They feel that other districts are facing even worse law enforcement response times because of their unique situations. In addition, 404 does not have the budget to hire school resource officers, and the pool of available resource officers in their area, which are typically off-duty police officers, is not existent. So they feel that they are not alone in this, and there are plenty of other districts in the same situation. And so they've brought this resolution to the Delegate Assembly, and what I'm asking our board is to help to come to a consensus of opinion and send me to the Delegate Assembly with direction on how to vote in favor of or against the concealed carry resolution.
I think specifically what happens with something like this is that Mark attends the School Board Association Delegate Assembly. If you're in agreement one way or another tonight, you give us direction. We will prepare, we just take the resolution that Mark has in front of him that you had in your board.
I just hold up a sign when I'm there.
He holds up a sign, but you guys can actually take a formal stand on it by voting no or yes at the next meeting, which is prior to the delegate assembly.
Oh, we're going to actually put it as a...
I would prefer that you take formal action on it.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that just because it passes doesn't mean that's legislation.
Right.
What happens is your organization is looking for what kind of support do we have, and then they look for legislators to take this. Obviously, there's a lot of school districts in the state of Illinois. Everyone feels very differently about this. And so the only thing I'm going to point out to all of you and reassure the audience is we have outstanding response time from the Lake Bluff Police as well as the Lake County Sheriff. So we're not like the places downstate. In fact, we're like in two different countries sometimes when I go to these meetings. But philosophically, you as a board have to determine if you're going to support this resolution or vote no. And then Mark goes and he holds up his sign, and then they'll announce, last year this almost passed.
Yeah.
So you need to know that last year this almost passed.
And so, just to clarify, like, we're not voting on whether we would have people in our
No.
schools armed. What we are voting on is whether we want the Illinois Association of School Boards to encourage people to develop a plan for that.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
So-
No, not a plan.
even that. It's not even that. And this
It's
is
just that the
important.
School Board Association would be able to say, our delegates voted to support,
And that gives them guidance for lobbying.
right, and then that gives them guidance for lobbying and working with legislators if they were to pass the law.
To be clear, so it would be allowing local school boards the option of developing student safety and protection plans which allow voluntary district employees
Yeah.
to conceal carry
If
under
the
certain
legislation even passed on
Right,
that.
right.
So it doesn't make it mandatory for
And
anybody.
in my mind, that's an important distinction, because although I would be, vehemently opposed to having firearms in our schools, I can't comment on what it's like in Mercer, where they seem to have legitimate safety concerns and seem to feel, as an informed school board, presumably, that that option would be a good one for them. So I would think we'd vote, I guess that would be voting in favor of the resolution to advocate for the position to give school boards that option. Let the local districts decide.
Many people I will share with you, many people do discuss this as local control. That they believe in local control, and every community should be able to do that. That has come up in conversations.
I don't know if we're supposed to continue talking about this now. I know we're maybe going to bring
Yeah,
it to
we got
formal.
You have to
but-
give me
okay.
guidance to bring a
I
resolution.
would say that I've had an opportunity to read research on this over the course of the past couple of years. We dabble in this a little bit through our text line at LEAD. What I'll say is that the research suggests that negative consequences are far more likely in this situation. So I know personally, I'll say right now, I will vote no. Recommend that we vote no towards that resolution. I get the fact that it wouldn't necessarily impact us here, and I get the fact that there's some element of local control, but the research is too strong in terms of the negative consequences that have occurred in those situations. And I'd be happy to pass that on if you guys want to see that.
I agree completely with Andy.
I do too.
I could not support in good conscience that law, that resolution.
Same.
Well, I certainly would not like to see teachers, I couldn't picture Annie being packing in the classroom.
You wouldn't want to mess with her.
I would not. But I do have I do think about the school systems where they're 60 miles away from a police station, and if something does occur, and there are people that live in those rural areas, and I happen to have a very good friend who lives in Kentucky. He knows about guns. He knows how to handle guns. He knows how they produce. I don't even get near them. I wouldn't pretend to get near them. But if it's an option that they have, they should, I think, be allowed to have that option. We can say no in our local school district.
But I think they have that option. What this is saying is that we want the IASB to advocate and lobby for that kind of, advocate for that legislation, which
Right.
I don't feel like they need to do.
I agree, because I think we can kind of only vote on how it would apply to us, because that's what we know, right? And so I would not advocate for that in our scenario.
But we can
I think
still-
others have the right to advocate for it in their scenario, but
Yeah, but I wouldn't pretend to form an opinion about whether they should have guns or not in their schools. I mean, I don't think we should. If we were voting on that today, it's an easy vote.
right.
But I don't think I'm ready to sit here and say, well, in Mercer County, I'm going to say that you can't do this.
They already can.
They already can do this.
Yeah.
No, I
There are
don't think.
schools all over the country that have people who are
We're not
armed.
allowed to in.
Well, and Illinois state law says
Illinois
it currently
schools.
does not allow for local
Yeah,
control.
Illinois law doesn't allow that now.
So I can't sit here in Lake Bluff and say, hey, in Mercer, you can't have guns in your school, if that's the way they're prepared to address the problem that they have. Again, for our own personal school district, I couldn't begin to support that, but I'm not going to speak.
But do you
for
want
Mercer.
IASB to advocate for laws that make it?
What it gives individual school systems and boards the opportunity to make their own decisions. That's what you were advocating for here. We're not saying yes or no, we're just saying that's your choice.
I'm sorry, John, I thought you were finished. Huh?
No, I mean, I'm just saying, I guess I'm not saying whether I'm in favor of or not. I'm saying, let's give them the choice to do what they think is appropriate at their school system, and let's give our system its own choice.
My big fear is the precedent it sets. I would much prefer a resolution that directed the IASB to create funding so that these schools could have SROs and initiate a number of any more effective, research-proven, scientific-based preventative measures rather than having. Yeah, so I think our vote for directing to no is saying there's much better ideas than this one. Something needs to happen, agreed, in rural places like this. But arming teachers, I think, is way lower on that totem pole. And I think there are opportunities there, actually, in Springfield to adopt legislation that would allow for other states have done it. But having the IASB focus on something more preventative, I think, is smarter. So that's why my vote would be a no. But
I did not read in your board packet is every single resolution, and I skimmed them all, and I can't pretend to speak from authority, but I think it's the second resolution does just that. It allows for districts to apply for grants to be used for things like that.
that's right, yep. But they didn't ask us to vote on that one,
We have
right?
not specifically been asked by members of the community to do that. Anybody else have anything they want to say?
Probably need to
So I
take a
think-
straw poll of some kind.
No, the poll, since we're
bring
not.
the resolution.
Bring the resolution
Okay.
as it is, and we'll vote yea or nay.
All right.
And then the majority is what we'll take to the delegate assembly.
Yep.
I think that's the fairest way to do it. All right, thank you. So the next item on the discussion is Mr. Jay Khan, our award-winning business officer, and talk about our levy.
I do want to share that our 2 new board members came in and met with Jay, so they are up to speed and ready to go. They could probably do it for you, Jay.
I think Ann can do it, not me.
This is our annual presentation of the tax levy. This presentation goes more into depth, just to refresh your memory on how it works and what the recommendation will be. So I'll go through the budget and just a brief education, talk about how it's calculated and what our projections are, and then give the recommendation. I present the budget here just to, one, show how much revenue that the district receives, about $19.7 million, but also to point out that it's by fund, and this is for the reason that we levy taxes individually by fund, so it's not really one levy, it's 7 different levies, and legally we're required to spend the money, to compartmentalize the money and spend it as we levied it. So transportation fund money can only be spent on transportation. Social Security money can only be spent paying Social Security taxes. Taking a look at the revenue, the district is heavily reliant on property taxes. We get about 90% of our money from local property taxes. The other local category is mostly fees and school lunch revenue. The state funding is 3%, and the federal funding is 2% of our total. There are over 200 taxing districts in Lake County alone, including schools, municipalities, libraries, et cetera. And Lake Bluff School District, elementary school district, accounts for about 40% of the average tax bill in Lake Bluff. The levy is actually the amount that we request to be raised from property taxes. It's not what shows up on people's tax bills. We make the request in December, and it must be submitted to the clerk by the last Tuesday in December. Illinois taxes are paid in arrears, so the request we'll be making at the end of this month for the 2019 tax year is not going to be collected until 2020. The tax extension is what actually gets billed to the taxpayer, and this constitutes our tax revenue. So we will submit a levy, we'll actually submit levies by fund, and then the county clerk will calculate the taxes, and they will be extended by the treasurer, and the tax bills will be sent out by the treasurer. Yeah, it's not working. Equalize assessed value. So when people get their blue pieces of paper from the township assessor at the beginning of the year, or at the end of the year, it's showing what your equalized assessed value is. Equalized assessed value is, so in Lake County, your assessed value by statute is 1/3 of your market value. So the assessors are estimating the market value of your property, and then the assessed value is just 1/3 of that. Each assessed value is determined by the township assessor, and there's multiple townships in Lake County, and each township assessor does their own assessment. And so the chief county assessment officer for Lake County will look at all the different township assessments and make a judgment to make sure that everybody's assessing fairly. If one township is assessing higher or lower, they apply an equalization factor to bring everything in line. And so that's why they call it an equalized assessed value, because they apply an equalization factor to that. And then the other thing is we're talking about a taxable assessed value. So once you get your assessed value, then you deduct any kind of exemptions, homeowners exemption, veterans exemptions, things like that. The other thing that's important is the CPI. This is a component of our tax levy, and it basically is the increase in the cost of goods as measured by the federal government. The CPI, it's questionable whether this is the right measure to use. This is how our revenue goes up. So our revenue goes up by CPI, and many districts try to tie their actual salary schedules to CPI. Our current salary schedule has a 3% step, so our teachers' salaries go up by 3% every year, and wage and benefit inflation goes up by anywhere from 5 to 10% every year. So the CPI average is about 2%, so we're increasing our revenue at 2%, and so we try to tie our expenses and our revenue together. The tax cap is essentially, our county is subject to a tax cap. The correct term is really the property tax extension limitation law. This limits the amount we can raise by taxes to the increase of the prior year can be no more than this consumer price index, or 5%, but it allows us to also levy for new property. So what the law allows us to do is maintain our revenue in real dollars and allow us to collect money for new property, which often brings new students. A new property is just defined as property that has not been taxed in the prior year. It's new construction, it's renovation, or it's property that's been reclassified. So this is kind of how it all works. The CPI that's used this year is 1.9%, and this measurement is the change from December of 2017 to December of 2018 in the consumer price index for all urban areas in the U.S. The taxes, the values that are used are basically the assessed values as of January 1st of 2019. We're kind of out here where we're about to file our tax levy, but the final tax rates are not calculated and sent out to taxpayers until March or April of next year. And then the money is collected in June and September. So the money is collected out here in 2020 for the 2019 tax year, and it actually becomes revenue for the fiscal year starting in July of 2020. So the 2020-21 school year is what we're using this revenue for. These values are based on prior sales for the last 3 years in 2016, 17, and 18. So that's kind of, it's a long process. We take sales starting in 2016, and that impacts your value in 2019, which impacts your tax bill in 2020, which we spend in 2021. How are my taxes used? So there's about a 12% chunk for Lake Bluff is used to pay debt service. And it's basically to pay the principal and interest on debt that's already been issued. This is not part of the levy request, but we publish it all together so taxpayers have an idea of what their total tax bill is going to be. The tax extension limitation law also introduced what's known as a debt service extension base. And what that law says is that you're allowed to issue new debt as long as the payment of principal and interest is not more than it was in the year in which the law was enacted, which was 1991. So most debt requires a referendum. We have to go to the taxpayer and ask them, hey, can we issue bonds, and this is what we're going to use the money for. There's a carve-out for non-referendum bonds that allow us to issue a limited amount of debt subject to that law. And then this is just a depiction of what our debt service schedule looks like. And the out years, the 2028, we'll see a big reduction in our debt. That's when the elementary school bonds are paid off, and the remaining portion is just the non-referendum debt that we issued for the middle school.
Jay, can you go back to that one?
Sure.
This would be a good time to kind of put the breadcrumb out there. Tammy, who comes in and has talked to us before about refinancing our bonds, has approached both Jay and I to tell us we can even save more money by refinancing. Yeah. Which year bonds would we be refinancing?
They're the 2010 issue, and they would impact, I think, payments starting in, it would impact over multiple years. I think it would start in 2019 or 20, and we have the opportunity to save approximately $200,000 over the remaining life of the bonds.
She's coming in the January meeting, and I found that to be very good news.
Yeah.
It extends the term, though.
Well, they're callable bonds, so we can set the term to be different. We can set it to be, I think.
So we'll see the values at different terms.
Yeah.
The savings at
like we
different
did
terms.
before.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this would be savings that would go directly, because this is not part of the operating levy, this is the debt service levy, which is separate. Any savings or reduction in payments would be dollar for dollar a reduction in tax bills to the community.
That would be great news.
Thank you for the reminder.
I thought we tapped out the ability to do
I
that.
thought we did
Yeah,
too.
we have one
and she
issue that's
approached both of
callable.
us.
They're about 4% right now. The bonds that we had issued in 2010 are at 4%, and the going rates are much lower than that. So the rate of return is like 13%.
Be here in January, so that was good news for
Yeah,
tonight.
that is good.
So the balance of the money that we take in, the 88%, is for operations. This is limited by the tax cap formula. It can only be increased by referendum outside of the formula, and includes all of our capital and safety funds, and it is part of the levy request. Once we figure out how much we need, they allocate the taxes to the taxpayers based on equalized assessed value. So Lake Bluff is highly residential. We're 88%, almost 90% residential, so most of the taxes are paid by homeowners in Lake Bluff. We have about 8% commercial property, 3% industrial, and a small balance of farm and railroad. And every single property, if you think about this as a pie, every home represents a tiny slice of that total tax pie. There's a mathematical formula that we do, but in essence, the concept is we take our prior year's extension, this is what was billed to taxpayers in the prior year, we grow it at CPI, so we need the same amount of money as we did last year to operate in real dollars, and then we add the amount for new property. And then for the future extension, it's based on the current year extension. So we would grow, in the following year, this total amount here would be grown at CPI, and then we would add any additional new property from the following year. So you can see that every year the taxes are based on the prior year. So we really want to make sure that we get the full amount of new property, because if somehow this amount of taxes that we issue this year, if we don't tax the new property at the appropriate amount, then we lose it the following year, because the following year is based on the prior year. We're growing the current amount in the future. And so we would lose it every year, and it would compound.
We only did that once, right?
We only did that once, and it was by choice.
Right,
So,
right.
but I'm just, as we talk about how we calculate, or how we estimate the amount that we tax new property,
Yeah.
it's important to understand that we want to make sure that we capture all the taxes on that new property, because if we don't get it now, we lose it forever in perpetuity. So I'm just going to focus on the existing property homeowners and how that works. So total taxes on existing property can never go up by more than CPI. This is baked into the formula and the law that this process is governed by. The way that they take that total tax pie and distribute it out to the homeowners is using the tax rate. So the tax rate is calculated by taking the total amount of money that we ask for, dividing it by the total EAV, and then taking that rate and multiplying it by each individual homeowner's assessed value. And then that gets your tax, the tax amount.
But an individual, to make it clear, an individual's tax bill can go up more than CPI.
An individual's tax bills can, right, and I'll give you reasons for that. So really what happens is, as your EAV goes up, your tax rate goes down, and as your EAV goes down, your tax rate goes up. So in 2008, when property values were decreasing by 20, 30, 40%, people expected their taxes to go down 20, 30, 40%, and were disappointed that they didn't. And the reason is because the school still needs to operate. We can't take in 40% less revenue, so we calculate a tax rate, and the tax rate has to go up in order to compensate for that decline in EAV. So differences in property assessment really can be the biggest driver. And as you said, John, taxes can go up on an individual homeowner by more than CPI. If all the slices stayed the same, so if everybody's property value goes up by 5%, then an existing homeowner should see no more than a CPI increase in our portion of the tax bill. If everybody's property goes down by 5%, it's the same. But if one property goes up by more than another, if you live in a neighborhood where property values increased faster than they did across town, then your slice of that pie is going to get bigger, and you're going to shoulder a bigger portion of that tax burden, and your taxes will go up by more. If your property value decreased less than everybody else's, it's the same. If you have, a large company or retailer who leaves town and they were a big portion of that tax pie, it gets redistributed to everybody else. So this is not to say that your taxes can't go up or down more than CPI, but if everybody's assessment goes up in lockstep, then your tax bill won't change by more than CPI. So new property. The way we calculate taxes on new property is we basically take the tax rate that we calculated for existing property, and we multiply it by the EAV of new property. So they take the existing property, the total EAV divided by existing property to get a rate, and then we apply that to property that's never been taxed before. So these dollars are incremental to the district. That's new money that we'd get on top to help us run every year. Because we don't know the tax rate yet, we're going to have to approve this levy in December, and we don't know what the tax rate is, and we don't know what the EAV of the new property is. We want to overestimate both of those to make sure that we're taxing enough, because what the county clerk will do is it will reduce our levy to what we're only legally allowed to levy through the formula before they issue the tax bills. So if we ask for too little, they're going to levy, or they're going to extend exactly what we ask for. If we ask for too much, they're going to say, no, you can't levy that much, you can't extend that much. We're going to back it off to the maximum that you can extend. And that's an important concept, because we don't want to under levy or under tax the new property, because again, it compounds every year and we would lose it forever. So the tax levy parameters, so in 2018, as I said, it was 1.9% was the CPI. Last year, it was 2.1%. Existing property, I'm expecting this year to go up by 4%. Last year, EAV went up by 1.2%. And then this is a big, important point. 2019 is a quadrennial reassessment year, so in Lake County, every property is looked at and reassessed. In the off years, in years 1, 2, and 3, what they do is they just look at the past 3 years of sales, and they estimate, and they look at how far they are from 1/3 of market value, and they apply that factor evenly across properties. So in a non-reassessment year, properties tend to go up and down together, which, as I said earlier, the more even your distribution of assessments is, the more likely your property taxes will change by CPI. In a reassessment year, you can see bigger swings because they're looking at each individual property. If your neighbor had their property reassessed, or if they appealed their assessment and had their property value reduced, this is the year they'll look at all of that, and then they'll make adjustments to all properties based on that. This is right straight off the township or the county assessor's website. You can see for Shields County, which is encompasses Lake Bluff, the 3-year average level of assessment was 32.5% of market value. It should be 33 1/3. So the county assessor is applying a multiplier of basically increasing all property values by 3.6% to make up for the underassessment of the Shields Township assessor. And then the balance to that 4% that I'm estimating was just the actual reassessments. New property, we're also expecting $3.7 million of new property this year. Historical new property, you can see, has been in the $1 to $3 million range, so it's higher than I was expecting, but it's still within kind of a normal range. The 2016 amount here was when we had Target and all the industry or commercial property in the district. If you look at our long-term projections, this is our 5-year projection. This is our current budget year. Our goal is to keep our fund balance between 30% and 50% of operating expenditures, which are those dotted bands. You can see that we are within those bands, but the trajectory of the forecast is downward, and that's really just inherent to the model where we grow our revenue by CPI, which is in the 2% range, and we have a salary schedule, or salary and benefits are 3/4 of our expenditures, and those are structurally will go up by more than the CPI. Now, the way we keep that from continuing to go down is by getting more new property. So this projection has an estimate of $2.5 million new property a year. This year we got 3.7, so we're getting more money than we expected, as well as just on the margin every year looking for cost savings and looking for ways to either bring in more revenue or do things in a more efficient way. But what this projection shows is that this projection also assumes that we're increasing our revenue at CPI, so we can't afford to, this already assumes that we're taking the CPI increase every year that the law allows. So that's my recommendation, is to ask for a CPI increase in our tax levy. Our fund balance, as I said, is currently in the desired range, but we need to keep pace with inflation. We will still be able to address our facility needs. There's $250,000 assumed in the projections annually for our capital improvements, and that matches our facility plan that was presented, that our architects did, that's been presented in the past. And it also preserves our PTEL base, which means that we preserves our ability to tax in the future as needed. So just looking at the numbers, the last year, this is compared to last year. Last year, the CPI was 2.1%. I'm expecting our EAV to go from $677 million to $708 million, which is a 4.6% increase, the 4% on existing property and 0.6% growth due to new property of $3.7 million. You can see that the operating tax extension last year was $15.4 million. Growing that by CPI gets you 15.7. We're getting an additional $82,000 or $83,000 from new property. I'm overestimating that new property by adding another $25,000 to make sure that we don't underestimate the taxes on the new property. Again, when the tax bills come out, we may or may not get any of that $25,000. So that for a total extension of $15.8 million, and then adding in our debt service extension gets us to roughly $18 million, or a total tax rate of $2.54 per $100 of assessed value. I'd also just like to point out that the tax rate here is going down. We should see a 2.4% increase in our total tax revenue, but a 2% decrease in our tax rate. Again, because our property value is going up by 4.6%, and our taxes are only going up by 2.5%. So that brings the rate down. So tax bills should see a decrease in rate, and existing homeowners should see an increase of roughly for an average home in Lake Bluff, it equates to about $91 in operating taxes and $4 in debt service, for a net increase in total taxes to the school district of $95. And so that will be, you'll see an estimate. You'll have to approve an estimated resolution for an estimated value in November, and then the final tax levy will be approved in December.
So you will get very abbreviated versions of this the next two meetings.
You guys can all come back.
You make this so exciting, though.
I know, it's just
Anybody have
stuff.
any questions for Mr. Khan on this?
No, thanks, Jay.
He's going to remain up there for the site-based expenditure, which will be very, very short.
Okay, keep going, Mr. Khan.
So the federal government passed the ESSA law, which includes a provision that requires school districts to publish, to calculate their expenditures by student, by school. So in the past, we used to just calculate total expenditures. Now we're required to delineate and calculate how much it costs to educate a student at every individual school. This is particularly useful or important for districts with lots of schools. So if I'm a district with 7 elementary schools, I publish how much I spend per student at each school, and that gives visibility to make sure that we're spending money across schools in an equitable way, and can make adjustments for that. For Lake Bluff, we have 1 middle school and 1 elementary school, and we expect to see differences in how much we spend per student because there are different methods of teaching. In middle school, you've got many more extracurricular activities. You have a different teaching model where you move from class to class and have a team model, so your staffing is different. So we're presenting this to you because it needs to be published on our report cards. We want you to see it before the report cards come out. It shows that we spend $17,700 per student at the elementary school, and $21,700 per student at the middle school. So we do spend more per student at middle. The public narrative basically describes what I just said. The reason is due, and we've talked about the reason before. We have fewer students at middle school. We have different staffing model. We've got lots of extracurricular activities and other costs. And then the average is $19,000 per student. And I also just want to point out that when our AFR, annual financial report, comes out, they calculate an amount per student, and it's different than this number because it uses uses a different, this uses enrollment, and that uses average daily attendance, and this is self-reported, whereas that uses audited numbers. So there's some other differences. But
Is debt included in that number?
debt is not included in this. This is, excludes capital spending and debt, so this is only operations. And the other thing I want to point out is that about 75% I've, through our accounting system, allocated directly or recorded directly to each school. So things that are easy to identify, like staff, I know this teacher teaches at this school, I'm buying supplies at that school. Those are recorded directly to the school, and then the 25% of costs that are overhead are allocated. Central administration is allocated on a per-student basis. General building maintenance is allocated on a square foot basis, and then kind of out-of-district tuition is allocated based on either number of IEPs or based on the number of students from each school who are outplaced. So three-quarters of the spending is, I can point at directly, I spent this here, I spent that there, and then the other quarter is allocated according to just methods that are recommended.
Questions for Mr. Khan? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So next up is Dr. Rubenstein will give us a presentation on Board Goal 1 update.
Right. Last month, I came to you and, thank you, talked to you regarding Board Goal 1, and that was really our internal measures regarding local district assessments, map growth, with some other updates. This month, we're coming to you with information about how we do on our external measures related to the Illinois Assessment for Readiness, the science assessment for the state, and some proficiency information, and all of that is aligned to Goal 1. Next month is going to be how we compare to actually the other schools in our benchmark districts. So you've got all that there. So we don't really have any comparison information. All that's actually going to be made public later on this week. These are the strategic plan indicators that we're going to be talking about, but these are all in Board Goal 1. Just so that everybody knows, Jay just talked about the ESSA, the federal government plan. So in 2018-19, the weighting was a little bit more focused on proficiency in terms of math and English language arts proficiency. And so it was based on 20% of that. This year for the 1920 school year, total score is garnered, we added 5%. This score is going to be based on science scores, and that's because we have 3 years now of data. 20% is still based on chronic absenteeism, 5% is based on the Illinois 5 Essential Survey, 50% is based on growth targets that are set by the state for our students. Just 15% now is based on proficiency for math and ELA. And then 5% is based on the EL growth to proficiency, so the English learner growth to proficiency. So that is much different than it was just 2 years ago in the 17-18 school year, where it was 100% based on the math and ELA proficiency. So just in terms of results based on growth, so the percentage meeting growth, you can see, and these are actually what happens here, and you will recall from last year that when you see the report cards that come out from the state, that the report cards are actually, they're not district-based, they're building-based. So in terms of the percentage of all students in the expected growth range on state assessments in the area of English language arts. We had relatively high numbers, and so for Lake Bluff Elementary School, 93.2% of our students in 18 were in that expected growth range, and that was at 86.4% this last year. Lake Bluff Middle School was at 87.5% last year, and now they're at 85.5%. And so the district average overall went down slightly. In math, it is a slightly different picture. you can go ahead. It is a slightly different picture, and so our LBES overall went up in terms of math, went down slightly at LBMS, and our district overall stayed about the same, if not going up slightly. So the percentage of all students in the expected growth range on the state assessment and math. So that's half of our score there that is being reported. Julie, did you have a question? No. Okay.
Can you talk to the previous slide?
Sure. Do you want to go back to that?
Yep. The English learners.
Okay. Yep. So you're going to see actually that pattern all throughout the presentation, and that is something that we are digging into all throughout this school year with a lot of professional development and areas of growth here. Just the percentage of students meeting expected growth, the percentage of our EL students who met their growth to proficiency targets, the number of students in that EL subgroup that met proficiency on science assessment, didn't meet where we expected them to be. And so that is coming up in all different areas. And so we're addressing that all throughout our population. It's not something that we had anticipated. And so we're really addressing that and hitting it hard with all of our teachers all across the board. So if you want to continue moving forward, we got that one. So now that we're looking at achievement, got it. And this is 15% of our score. So is my time up? All right. All right. In terms of student achievement overall, and this is a small amount of the score overall, and so we tend to pay less attention to this, and so the percentage of students who met that standard overall at LBES went down slightly at LBMS in the areas of English language arts. It is important to remember that we were in year 2 of implementation of the new English language arts curriculum at the middle school, and we were in year 3 of the reading curriculum at the elementary school, and so we've still got some areas to grow there, but some things that we are definitely really proud of and that we're going to continue to work on are like the subgroup of special education and students in that area there.
Just roughly,
Yep.
total numbers, how many kids would be in each of those groups, just roughly?
Which-
So take English learners.
So for last year, in 3rd through 8th grade, it would probably be around 40.
And what that means with our small numbers too is if only a couple don't meet growth, then that brings not only that subgroup down, but it brings our whole school score down for that as well.
Yep. So then in the area of math, Lake Bluff Middle School achievement actually was pretty steady. Elementary school went down slightly, and so the district average was down just slightly. And I know that we're moving through this very quickly. I know that everybody there's a lot on the agenda this evening. So, but then this is not an ESSA measure, but something that we always take a look at is the percentage of all students at the highest level on the state assessment. In terms of English language arts, this is something where we actually experienced a great deal of growth across the board for the most part. So, and this is an apples to apples comparison, so that if you look across the board there, 4th grade is actually like that 1.1% was when they were in 3rd grade, and 19.5% is when they were, is now. So yeah, it's a nice comparison there. And then the same thing for math, and so we've got that there. And again, we're experiencing growth and across the board in terms of the percentage of all students at the highest level on our state assessments. And this is something that that when we report next month, that we'll do a nice comparison overall about what that looks like across the board in terms of other school districts in the area. So then the results for the science assessment. So this is actually the first year that we would have 3 years of data. So I just went back the other day and looked. So the 8th graders, when they took the assessment in 5th grade, it was actually 83% of them who met proficiency, and so we actually experienced a nice increase in the percentage of them who were meeting the proficiency standard. And then 5th grade, that's the first time that they've ever taken that assessment, and so that is a nice thing. You can't really compare year to year in terms of special ed or low income or EL because it's just a 3-year growth rate. Yes.
Quick question. Are English language learners being tested in their native language or in English?
So they are not actually able to be tested in their native language unless they meet certain rules.
So, like certain students perhaps who just had they're very new English learners maybe would be tested in their own language?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so if you've been here for a certain period of time, then you're going to be tested in English.
We have really specific federal and state laws on that.
Like they give you a certain amount of time to bring them up to speed and then...
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And there, quite honestly, are not, there's not a way to translate. There's nothing that we can really do about that. So, but the flip side of that is that some of our English learners are not actually proficient in their quote unquote native language either, in reading their native language either. They may be proficient in speaking their native language, but not reading it. So, yep. So then, in terms of algebra readiness, this is an area where we expected to experience a decrease. One of the things that we did when we changed our math curriculum over the last couple of years is that we shifted the focus because what we were hearing from our students and our parents and families was that we were putting a lot of academic pressure on our students, and that was actually, and we were having a lot of students who were actually entering the high school not well prepared, and they were having to repeat courses because our algebra classes were not at a high enough level. So what we did was make sure that our classes in math were appropriately aligned, and we did that with the high school and with District 67. And so what that looks like here then is that while we had in the past about 98% of our students who were completing algebra by the end of 8th grade, we have 67%, 2/3 of them doing that now. And that is pretty consistent with many of the other areas, schools. And so that is certainly a drop-off that we expected. So then, in terms of designations, as I put these designations up here, it will be interesting to note that actually the scores for Lake Bluff Middle School actually went up from last year, and the score for Lake Bluff Elementary School went down from last year. Both Lake Bluff Elementary School and Lake Bluff Middle School were designated as exemplary schools last year, and it all has to do with how you compare to other schools across the state. Their growth across the state. So, because the growth is the biggest thing. So, when you look at the designations, even though Lake Bluff Elementary School's score went down, they were actually still designated as exemplary when compared to all elementary schools. Lake Bluff Middle School, while their score went up, they were not in the top 10% of the schools. So they actually just missed it by 1.5 points, as they just missed the cutoff. But they're still probably in the top 11.5%. 12% of all schools in the state, and certainly no schools in the underperforming or lowest performing, which would require action by the school district or the board in order to turn the school around. So that is what we have for you this evening, and next month we will come back with a far more detailed report when we have a little bit more time about how both schools compare to other schools in the area, and with some information about climate and culture related to the 5 Essential Survey.
I do have a quick question. How much is that designation from exemplary to commendable at the middle school have to do, or does it have anything to do with the expected decrease in students completing algebra? Is that part of the equation, or is
Nothing
that
at all.
completely?
Nothing at all. So the scores are all based on that first pie chart at the beginning. So the scores are all based on that pie chart right there. So there's nothing that has to do with the algebra readiness.
So is that something we should be concerned about then, or?
The algebra readiness?
No, not that, the designation.
So it's the sort of one public thing that goes out.
Want it to be exemplary.
We
Right.
certainly want to be exemplary, and so that's certainly something that we will continue to strive for, and that we always strive to be. And so we work really hard with our teachers, and that we work really hard with our students to make sure that we are helping them to grow and learn as much as possible.
Sure. And it's yearly, right? They designate this yearly?
Annual,
Okay.
it's an annual designation.
Along with comparisons next month, Kevin will briefly discuss kind of overall professional development that's been impacted by the scores.
Got it, okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Kevin.
All right.
Questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jean, how fast can you do this next one?
This will be very fast.
Hearing on adoption of e-learning verification program.
So I want to reassure everybody that we still do not have the exact rules from the state on e-learning. However, I wanted to have a hearing and allow us the ability to use an e-learning day if the rules come out and we need to put it together. You know, you might ask me, Jean, what would a need to put this together be? If we use 4 weather days, by the way, it's supposed to snow on Thursday on Halloween. If we use 4 weather days, I'm going to need to be working with the staff and saying, all right, that gets us to the end of the first week in June. We need to look at some other alternatives. The important piece when you read the resolution is that we have to look for equitable solutions and assignments for students. So the assignments have to be either, well, we have to offer all assignments non-electronic. Students could be electronic. We have to worry about supervision of kids at home. So therefore, we would work with the teachers to maybe have an assignment that could be turned in a week later. There's all these different options. The bottom line is, we still don't have all the rules, and right now, I would say we're not going to do it. But we need to have the option to do that in case the weather gets bad and we actually do get the rules from the state. So tonight I ask you to approve this, so it gives us the option later on down the road, and I will keep both you and our parents notified of what we're going to be doing with this in the future.
What are we approving?
You're approving the ability for the district to use an e-learning day if we were to need it this year.
And we need to approve that.
Yes, you do need to approve that.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so let's go to actions, item 9. The first one is just following up on what Dr. Sophie discussed, approval of a resolution to adopt e-learning program. May I have a motion to approve the resolution to adopt an e-learning program as presented by the administration?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All right, roll call vote, please.
John Rosen.
Yes.
Leanne Charlo. Yes. Julie Gottschall, yes. Richard Haag.
Yes.
Andy Duran.
Yes.
Ann Hill.
Yes.
Mark Berry.
Yes. Item 9B is the approval of a truth and taxation hearing scheduled for December 19th. That's for our levy, correct?
Yes.
So, may I have a motion to approve of the resolution to adopt a taxation hearing in December, for December 19th at 6:45 PM as presented by the administration.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Leanne Charlo?
Yes.
Julie Gottschall, yes. Richard Haig?
Yes.
Andy Duran?
Yes.
Ann Hill?
Yes.
Mark Barry?
Yes.
Jim Rosen?
Yes.
The next one's going to be minus the
Yeah,
facilities.
yeah. So item C is, 9C is board policy. In that category, in there we have 5 categories of policies that were reviewed, 13 individual policies. And I just want to give a shout out to our policy committee for all the work. Thank you. That's a lot of work. We appreciate that. In this approval, we are going to pull out and table item C5.
5A, isn't it?
C5A, Community Relations, Policy 820, Community Use of School Facilities, because there's just too many edits to give it that approval of the first read at this point. So that being said, may I have a motion to approve the first read of all those other board policies as presented by the administration?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Julie Gottschall, yes. Richard Haig?
Yes.
Andy Duran?
Yes.
Ann Hill?
Yes.
Mark Barry?
Yes.
Jim Rosen?
Yes.
Leanne Charlo?
Yes.
Motion is approved. Item D, personnel report. This month's personnel report includes 2 licensed FMLAs for Kate Sapienza, a second grade teacher, requesting the FMLA medical leave at the elementary school effective March 7th for about 12 weeks. The second is a Sarah Haslow, a learning behavior specialist, requesting FMLA medical leave at the middle school, returning to work on December 9th of 19. And the other personnel item is a non-licensed FMLA, Bob Wiswald in maintenance, requesting medical leave at the district office effective October 7th, 19, and it's an intermittent leave. Questions or comments about that? May I have a motion to approve the October 29th, 2019 personnel report as presented by the administration?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Richard Haig?
Yes.
Andy Duran?
Yes.
Ann Hill?
Yes.
Mark Barry?
Yes.
Jim Rosen?
Yes.
Leanne Charlo?
Yes.
Julie Gottschall, yes.
Okay. Your voice only has to hold out for like 2 mornings. Item E, consent agenda. This month's consent agenda includes open session meeting minutes for September 24th, 2019 regular Board of Ed meeting, the September 24th, 2019 budget hearing, the October 8th, 2019 regular Board of Ed meeting, closed session meeting minutes for September 24th, 2019 regular board meeting, the treasurer's report, the impress report, the bills report, and the P-card report. Would anybody like any of that pulled out for discussion separately from consent?
No, thank you.
May I have a motion, may I have a motion to approve the October 29th, 2019 consent agenda as presented by the administration?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Andy Duran?
Yes.
Ann Hill?
Yes.
Mark Barry?
Yes.
Jim Rosen?
Yes.
Leanne Charlo?
Yes.
Julie Gottschall, yes. Richard Haig?
Yes.
Motion's approved. Great. So we had 4 FOIA requests this month, the details of which are in the board packet if anybody's interested. Now we return to public comment, and I'll just remind people if they'd like to speak, you have 5 minutes to speak. You'll be timed, and you must yield the podium when your time is up. We will carefully consider all your comments, but not respond or engage in discussion. I will ask that we group by subject matter. The first people to the podium, I would ask that it would be having to do with our facilities use policy, second by standards-based reporting. So let's begin with anybody who'd like to speak about facilities use.
Mark, were we going to take a vote on this? Were we going to take a vote on the DIA?
That'll have to be at the next meeting.
Yes, sir.
Frank Swanton, 363 Vincent Court. Needless to say, I'm very disappointed in this board's action on this item. There's nothing wrong with this draft. There's nothing wrong with this draft that couldn't be taken care of tonight and have ready for second reading. It's going to be another 2 months that this is going to drag on, basically because one of your board members nitpicks every single thing that comes out of here. Yes, you can raise your hand.
That's me. Well, that.
Right. And I think that that's totally out of line. Not only that, but you choose a committee to rework this, and you put her on the committee, the most negative person for this
Pony,
of the whole
we don't need to be
board.
personal.
I'm not being personal,
Sounds like
I'm
you are.
stating a fact. These are
you're-
facts that Julie has been negative about this from the very first meeting. And I don't think it's appropriate for her to be on the committee.
We've got the point, thank you. You don't need to be personal.
Okay. Lastly, and it is lastly, because I've had enough of this. I've worked on this with Dr. Sophie for weeks to get to this point, and to have one board member nitpick it so badly that you'll table it is absolutely ridiculous.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now we're going to move on to anybody who would like to address the board on standard-based reporting. You can state your name and your address, please.
I'm Joy Markey. My address is 117 West Blodgett Avenue in Lake Bluff. I just want to thank everyone. I know standard-based recording has been an emotional thing for a lot of people, and I appreciate all the comments tonight. I appreciate the board taking the time to listen to it, and I appreciate the teachers being here. I've been up here quite a few times talking about this topic, and I feel like the bottom line comes down to we really need to be aligned to the high school. I know you've heard it plenty of times, but I just really feel like it sets our kids up for better success when they're aligned with the high school. So I get the feeling we're going to start this process over again. Now we're going to go back and we're going to talk about blending standard-based grading with traditional grades. It's going to take us another, 9 months to do that? I would love to see that happen in the last trimester of this year rather than the beginning of fall of 2020. And I'd also love to see an advisory group put together that consists of parents, teachers, administration, maybe a board member, because I feel like we kind of got to this point because no one really listened to the parents, and we too just want what's best for our children. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any comments for anything else? Sure.
Separate comment. Do I have to restate everything? All right. Annie Chance, 8 West Stone Avenue, Lake Forest. I just wanted to, I've been thinking about this for many months now, but publicly thank Mark and John, Jean, Jay, Kevin, as members. I was a member of the negotiating staff for Lake Bluff, and with everything that's going on in the state, and I just wanted to show my appreciation for you, and the mutual respect that we have for you and that you have for us is just phenomenal, and so blessed to work here and work with you guys twice now through the negotiation process.
Thank you. Anybody else on the board have a comment? Yes. Please.
I have to admit, I'm kind of mystified at what's driving this. I mean, if we assume first, and I believe this is true, that children are our first priority, why would we consider this?
Can you state your name and address?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim Fuentes, 710 Blodgett Avenue. I don't understand. I'd rather have my children in school on June 7th, one day later, than receiving an e-learning day. And not only that, but you're not taking into consideration the parents who then will have to stay home with their kids, rather than when they're not in school. And many of us only get paid if we show up for work. Mm-hmm. Does teachers' contracts specify how many days they're going to teach? Will one day be refunded for every day of e-learning? I see nothing equitable in this. I don't understand it. What is driving this? What is driving the fact that you're so concerned about children getting out on a specific day come hell or high water?
I'm going to just answer a couple questions.
I appreciate that.
So first of all, you need to know that our ability to use an e-learning day, we could actually do it on a teacher institute day where the kids are already home. The main thing that drives it is we have found, especially in the past 2 years when we've had to call 5 days of school, that when we get into the second week in June, we struggle getting the mandatory attendance that even counted as a school day to be reimbursed, because so many of our kids are in camps and all different kinds of things like that. So That's the reason, and if we have the ability to use it on a Teacher Institute day when the kids are already home, that saves us the ability of really having to tack on an extra day at the end when we struggle to get the kids here. We really do that second week in June.
I'm hearing what you're saying, but I don't think anybody could argue that an e-learning day is the equal of a school day.
I would totally agree with you on that.
Otherwise, why don't we close the schools and just have e-learning days all year long?
I would agree, and it in no way mimics our wonderful teaching staff, so I agree
I have
with
to
you
be
on that.
consistent in the
Yeah, I
rules. This
agree.
is not
I'm
a
sorry.
place for debate.
I'm sorry,
I appreciate your comments, but this is not a place for debate.
Okay, okay, let me just make a few more comments. I'm not debating.
Okay, but your time is
It
up.
just doesn't seem equitable. Teachers are paid a certain amount. They're coming for fewer days of work, essentially, to do this. And parents are an imposition, unless you do them all on Teachers Institute days, which I don't know is required, you're shifting a burden from teachers to parents. So, that's my comment.
Appreciate your concerns.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any comments for the board? All right. Does the board have any other comments? May I have a motion to adjourn at 9 PM?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.